Hello guys, this is part 3 of this mini-series where I'm going through that 1946 dump truck's engine. It's a very nice farm machinery. We're not treating it as a classic car, but I still want to make sure that it runs for a long time, and I'm trying to keep it original. So this 216 engine is very special to me. It's a very old engine. It's pretty much before World War II technology, and I really wanted to clean it up, make sure it's not leaking and it's got clean oil in it, and then I think if I give what it needs, it will run for a long time. So let's get back into it. If you haven't seen part 1 or part 2, I'm gonna leave a link in the description. Please start with those videos if you're interested in to see this old farm truck comes alive again. Well, let's get into it. Well, it very much looks like it's gonna remain an open question. The rest of them have a little plug in it, and they have a metered pinhole in it, just like in a carburetor, and they don't let all the oil through, just a little bit, so it's basically seeping through. But this one has a big one, and the little a little metering hole is missing because it's unmetered. It's like a really big hole there. But this is what I bought, and it says made in USA. Maybe that's the problem. If it's not Chinese, it's not original. So if any of you know what the answer here is, please send me a message. And meanwhile, I'm gonna try to locate an original lifter, a used one. Maybe that will work better. While I'm figuring out all this lifter situation, I'm gonna clean and lube this rack up. I'm gonna have this assembly lube, and I'm gonna clean all the junk off of it. I'm gonna open up the holes wherever there's a hole in it, and install it back nice and clean. The orientation is important, so I just lay them out the way it is, the way they came off. Now I'm gonna wire brush this shaft, make it kind of smooth as much as possible, and then I'm gonna start getting on the individual parts. I also gonna wash out the inside. There are some cavities in there where the oil goes in and comes out, so I'm gonna clean those out with some brake clean as well. Part of the cleaning process is gonna be to make sure that these adjusters are able to adjust by hand, so I'm gonna have to take them out and wire brush them and clean them to make sure that I can adjust them very easily. It was quite a bit more tricky than I thought it would be. I had to wash it out with a garden hose and all kind of things, and it's still dirty inside, so I'm spraying with the brake clean or carb clean, and then pulling this rag through, stuffing it like it would be a gun or something, and then trying to pull it out and make it clean again. You can see it was kind of worn, so I think it didn't get enough oil or something, but I think I saved it at the last minute. It's not a good idea to put this one in the vise because you're gonna hurt the surfaces around here. So I just had the impact wrench and I opened this one up. The problem is that it's rolling, so I'm gonna have to use a screwdriver. So I'm gonna take it out, put this nut in the vise, and then I'm gonna use the screwdriver to make this thread work again. I'm gonna lube it up, and then I want to be able to turn this nut by hand before I put that back in there. I finished cleaning all of them, and now it's time to assemble it. So there are some holes. See the big hole right there, and there's one right there where these towers will go through, and then there is a bolt will go through that tower. So you can orient this shaft 180 degrees off, either this way or that way. Now think about it a little bit. These little holes, there's no hole on the other side, just here. So if these little holes are on the top, the oil will come out right through that little hole on these rocker arms right there, and that's not good. So this one's supposed to be oriented 180 degrees, so these holes will be at the bottom, so the oil will make its way up, exit on those little holes, and then lubricates the shaft meanwhile. So if you see it like this is the wrong way, so I need to turn it around, and I will need 2 hands for it. So make sure those holes are at the bottom, not on the top when you assemble it. I'm gonna go very basic on you guys now, and I'm gonna apologize from the older crowd, but there are some kids who haven't seen such a thing as a adjustable rocker arm. So there is a thread in it. If I show it, yeah, there is a thread in there. This one practically a screw, so you screw that screw in here, and as you screw it in, well, if it screws in, it's gonna go through, and it's gonna end up in the push rod on the other side. And then whenever you find the proper adjustment, then you can put this knot on, and this is how you secure this bolt so it wouldn't turn. Like right now, see, now it's turning right now because I'm turning that knot. That's why you have to hold it with a screwdriver when you're at the proper position. And when you put this knot down to this, that's how you can secure it from moving. So basically you're locking the whole adjustment. And you can see it's round because that's where the push rod is going to end up in it. And then you're going to have to measure the valve lash or the clearance here with a feeling gauge. It's going to be very, very tiny. And then when you are at the right place, you can basically rock it like this a little bit with your hand, and you can adjust with this. But we're going to do that once I get it together. So I wanted to show you how one of these looks like in pieces, so you understand what we're doing later. And I already cleaned those first ones. I cleaned the shaft, and I'm working on these ones right now. And of course this one is all done already. Everything is ready now. I put the bolts in. I cleaned the bolts as well. And you make sure you remember that you got washer under the bolts, and under the nuts you got this nice little looking washer. The nuts will go to this where the stud is, and then this thing will go in, and that's where the oil coming up from. You can see there is the thread in it, and then this is where it goes back, the excess, if there is any. Now one thing what I still need to do before I do this is to clean these ones, clean the push rods. So I'm just gonna clean the inside and the other side where the bump is. That part is going down into the lifter. This part gonna come to this ball what we already cleaned. I'm just gonna put a little bit of this stuff in it once it's clean, and I'm gonna clean the length of it, and then I'm gonna install them into the car or into the engine, because then it's gonna be a lot easier time than if this one is on. Before I put this thing on, I've blown out these holes to make sure there's no debris in them, because I don't want to screw that screw in it and then get it stripped. But other than that, the push rods are going in. I'm still debating on the last lifter what to do with it, but we'll find out. So I'm just gonna keep on going with these push rods and then put the rack on. I've talked to a couple of my friends, and they told me that lifter probably gonna be just fine. So I'm just gonna assemble the whole thing and then go with it. We're gonna start the engine, or actually gonna rev up the engine without the spark plugs to make sure we got all the oil pressure come up, and then we're gonna see how much is leaking, but I think it's gonna be just fine. I just got excited over nothing. I'm just basically using my hand to put these bolts in until they actually touch the those towers, but holding it, and I really wanted to be it even so it wouldn't bend these two shafts. So I'm just slowly going closer and closer with it, and then try to make sure that it's kind of even. Over here I'm gonna have to use a little bit of force because they have that shoulder, and the shoulder has to go and make way. Yep. And then you gotta be careful with the push rods. Make sure the push rods are staying in position. The push rod comes out and you pull it down, it's not gonna be a pretty day. So I wanna make sure that all the push rods are in position for them. It might be too basic for some of you, but I'm pretty sure there will be some kids who are trying to do this at home and one day, and then they have no idea how to do that, and then they're gonna hopefully watch this video and they're like, oh yeah, I think I can do that too. So yeah, so I'm almost tightening up these things all the way, If you have any thoughts about the that lifter, please leave me any message in the comment, or anything else what I did wrong, or you think I should have done other ways or better or worse or anything. Just write me, please. I like to hear what you think. These engines are not around anymore. Everybody's changing them to the big V8s, and they just put a modern engine in it because they say it's more usable. I kind of like this thing to be old, and I like this to be original. And if this engine breaks, I will fix it. And most likely if I can't fix it, I'll find another engine, just a similar vintage, and then I'm gonna put that back in. So I'm just a weirdo, I know, that not putting a V8 in this. So it's almost tightened, and then we can, next thing we do is we can adjust the valve lash on each and one of those cylinders. Again, I like to apologize from the older guys who know how to do this, but maybe some younger kids watching this and then they have no idea what we're doing. So I'm gonna try to explain the whole thing as a whole. So the idea is that we want to set up the valve clearances, the clearance between here, where this rocker arm touches the valve. So that's the idea. If it's too much, like right now, it's way too much, then it's gonna just keep hitting it, and then you're gonna have a little or a lot of sound like a sewing machine, that clack, 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 clack kind of sound. So ideally, you want to have just a little bit of lash, so this spring can bring the valve up, all the way up, and close the combustion chamber. In order to do that, you can adjust on the other side with these, what we already cleaned, and you can adjust that, and you can adjust the valve lash. See, as I'm turning it in, it's actually adjusting it. See, it's going down. And when it went down all the way, that's not good. So you got to go back up a little bit. And now we're going to use a feeler gauge to go in between and make sure that feeler gauge goes in just so. And then we set up the valve clearance here, the valve lash here. Some cars, they do this when the engine is hot. Some cars, it doesn't matter. Some cars has a different one for the exhaust and different for the intake. And all the cars are different, but one thing is the same. You need to set this up. If there is no clearance here, there is no lash here, then the valve will not close on the top of the combustion chamber. Therefore, the gases will escape, and when the compression stroke, the piston comes up, the gas will escape and either come back to the intake or goes out to the exhaust, and then you just have an inefficient engine. It's possible that it's good when it's cold. When it warms up, it's not enough because everything expands by the heat, and then the lash goes away. So that's another problem, could be. So the main thing is to follow what the manual says and set it up accordingly. Now the question is, how do you find which valve to adjust? Because right now you can see this one is actually compressed, and then this one was loose. So what we really want to do is to adjust the cylinder what actually under ignition. That time, the camshaft, which is way down under the other side, is actually, the lobes are basically facing the other way, and then the lifters are at the lowest points, and that's when you're supposed to set it up. So how do you know when is an engine on ignition? But fairly simple. Let's go to the other side. Since I didn't remove the ignition is still set. So this is the ignition rotor shaft was being turned by the camshaft, and on the top of this, there's this thing called the rotor that goes on there, and this thing sits on top of it, and this thing will start turning. As it start turning, it will point to the cylinders, which represented here. So if you look at, I don't know, it's kind of hard to do it, so you can see it's actually pointing to each cylinder, and the wire will go to the cylinders. So like this one is 5, and then we know that that's 5, and it's pointing to this. So when it's pointing to that cylinder, that's when we can actually do that valve lash adjustment. If you don't have the ignition unit in it and you need to adjust the ignition in it, the way you do it is set it to the mark. There is a top dead center mark on this car. It's usually on the flywheel. This car, you can see it there, which is right now it's not there, but there is that hole which you can see through, and then you can find the top dead center. Like, I cannot even reach it. It's this hole right here, and there's usually a mark, and there's a ball hit into the main what you call it, flywheel, or there is some sort of mark on the front, but it's really inaccessible. Some cars have it marked on the front flywheel, sorry, the front, the front part here, the harmonic balancer where the belt is going. So you got to find where the mark is for the top dead center, and then you got to put this in so the rotor will point to the number 1 spark plug wire. So it will have to adjust this. I have to adjust that until it points to the number 1 spark plug wire, but when you push it in, it will actually move away a little bit, so you got to make sure, and then you can adjust this once the engine is running. Actually, it's ideally when the engine is not running without spark plugs, you kind of start cranking it and you adjust it before you start the engine to make sure there is no pre-ignition. But let's just not go there. It's a little bit too far and too deep. So over here, we're just going to put this rotor on, and then we're going to see which cylinder does it pointing to. In this cap, there is a wedge. It's right here. This wedge goes into the wedge right here. So we're just going to look at where is it pointing to, and now it's pointing to this one, and this one goes, and it just fall off. Fantastic. The paper just fell off of it. Well, let's see, hold on one second. And that was number 3 cylinder. So we should be able to adjust the number 3 cylinder. And it's not going. It's too tight. So to begin, I moved it to the number 1 ignition. The way I see it's the number 1 ignition because this rotor is pointing at the number 1 ignition, which is right here. If I could show it to you. Yep. So it's right at 6 o'clock. So this is the number one wire, and the opposite end is the number 6 wire. So the way I can see it is in here. So if this one was number 1, then this one will be this one. If this one was number 1, this one will be number 6. So the exact opposite what we're working on is represented here. So if we're working on the number 1 cylinder, then we can look at the number 6 and then see when it's actually changing. So when both of them are actually just exactly changing, then this one will be on ignition. Exactly. So that's how mechanically we can see when we adjust which cylinder. So once this one is actually moving, it's really hard to move it by one hand, but you can see it's coming up. Oh, and now it's right there. Oh. So it's very hard to. But when you turn the engine without spark plugs, then you can see these ones coming up and down. And when this one actually just right there, then this thing will be on ignition, and then you can adjust it. So this one is not moving at all. The intake is not moving at all. The exhaust is sort of okay. So you have to have a really good screwdriver what goes right in that hole very nicely, and then you can release it until, see it's coming up, see that it came up. So now it's actually have a little clearance. So I just adjusted this when I put the thing together, so it was maybe too close. So now both of them has a little bit lash, so that's good. So now we can measure the lash with a feeler gauge. This is how a feeler gauge looks like. And now, older guys, I know you start laughing and maybe just turn this thing off, but here's the numbers on the side. One says 0.018, the other one say 0.006. The exhaust and the intake exhaust has to be a lot more than the intake. So this is the exhaust, this is the intake. So the first one, it should be this one. And when we put it in between, then it should be really tight. So I'm gonna use the screwdriver and the wrench to tighten it down, with the screwdriver to adjust it. First, let's work on the exhaust side. That's the one with the 0.018. So I'm just gonna put this in here, and we're gonna screw it until this one is actually kind of a little bit hard. So when I pull it out, I can hear a little noise, and I have to push it in, so that's the perfect place. Now you gotta be careful. If you move this screw away, then you're basically changing the adjustment. So you want to make sure that you hold the screwdriver in one position where it was good. Test it again, and now it went, yeah, there it is. Where the feeler gauge still kind of moves, but not all that much. And then now you're gonna tighten this nut, and we're gonna hold that adjusting screw back with the screwdriver. So we're gonna put that 5/8 wrench on it, and we're gonna find a slot, and I'm gonna hold it, and then we're gonna tighten it up. Be careful not to let the screwdriver move away. Let's hope it didn't move away. So we're gonna try it again, and now it's perfect. And it's a kind of little loose. Well, now I feel it's a little loose because it's too easy to put in there. So that means I'm gonna have to just tighten just a little bit more on it, and that moved the adjusting screw with it, and now it's perfect. That's it. And now we're gonna do the other one. So the intake, you're gonna go until it's actually, well, now I can't pull it out, so that's too tight. Yeah, just about there. So now you can tighten this nut on first by hand because it's way too loose. And then I'm gonna put this on and tighten it up. And let's try it again. Perfect. That's really nice. So now this is done. So this one has a little bit more, this one has a little bit less. Now the main thing is that this car, by the shop manual, requires valve-lash adjustment when the engine is really hot. Not just a little hot, not just like you warmed up the engine and okay, you can still touch it. I mean a real hot engine, you just came off the freeway hot. That's when I have to readjust it. But until then, just to start the engine, this is good for now. And also I need to retighten the cylinder head bolts. So once I run it a little bit and it gets really hot, I'm gonna do two things. I'm gonna readjust the valves and retighten the cylinder head bolts. So it might be obvious, but if you're working on this engine, you gotta be realizing that this longer valve, that's the intake and this is the exhaust, and they're not oriented the same way. So intake, exhaust, exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust, exhaust, intake. Make sure you adjust them accordingly. Also, if you adjust the lash just a little bit bigger, that will be just fine. So depends on how you drive this car, but the little valve noise is great. These things are basically sewing machines. That's what you want to hear. This is it for now. Next week the truck's gonna start. We're gonna get a new exhaust system, and we're gonna have to address some other issues which are not yet known. Please come back for next Friday for the next part. Thanks for watching, and see you guys later. Bye.